night of New Year's Eve was eerily quiet. There were no cheering crowds, no booming firecrackers, no festive decorations lighting up the night sky. The entire town seemed to be in a state of suspended animation, with no signs of life left in the streets. But it wasn't just the lack of activity that had people so spooked. Strange things had been happening around the town all year long, and the eerie silence of this night seemed to be the final curtain call. Suddenly, a ghoulish figure appeared in the shadows of the night. Clad in a dark cloak and wearing a twisted mask, the figure moved like a specter across the deserted streets. Everywhere it went, it left behind a dark and eerie presence. The figure seemed to be searching for something, pausing ever so briefly to peer into the windows of the homes it passed. After a few moments, the figure stopped in front of a single home and stepped inside. Inside the home, a baby was crying. The figure ignored the cries and continued to wander, eventually disappearing into a dark corner of the house. The entire town was enveloped in an atmosphere of dread, with many wondering just what horror awaited them on the other side of the night. Despite the ghoulish figure, when the clock struck midnight, the bells rang out in solemn celebration, a reminder to all that life still went on. But the next morning, the town awoke to a terrible sight: a dead baby, lying in a pool of blood. The townspeople never found out who the figure was or where it came from, but to this day, they still shudder when they remember the haunting events of that bloody New Year's night. It was the night before New Year's Eve, and the town of Samsville was aglow with festive decorations. Everyone was eagerly anticipating the start of the new year, but something felt off in the air. There was a strange tension in the air that no one could quite put their finger on, and it had been this way for weeks. As the clock struck midnight, the townspeople began to gather in the town square for the New Year's Eve celebration. But this was no ordinary celebration, for before their eyes a gruesome scene unfolded before them. Blood pooled on the cobblestone streets, corpses littered the square, and the stench of death lingered in the air. The townspeople were frozen in shock and fear. What had happened here? How had this gruesome scene come to be? No one dared to venture out into the square and investigate, and so the scene remained a mystery. As the days passed, the townspeople grew increasingly anxious. Was this a sign of things to come in the new year? Was the town doomed to suffer another horrific night like this one? They never found out, for on the night of the next New Year's Eve, the town was strangely silent, and the scene in the square had been completely erased as if it had never been. To this day, no one has ever discovered what happened in Samsville on that fateful night, and the townspeople are left to wonder what could have been. It had been a cold and windy night on New Year's Eve. Deep in the heart of the dark, eerie forest, a group of friends had gathered to welcome in the new year. But as they counted down the seconds and wished in the new year, they could feel a chill of dread in the air. Little did they know the terrors that awaited them on that night. The group huddled closer together for warmth as the minutes passed, and gradually began to notice strange noises in the forest. They heard a low, menacing growl that seemed to be coming from every direction at once. Then the growling began to increase in volume. It was joined by the sound of chains dragging on the forest floor. Something was out there. The group was frozen with fear as they heard the sound of a creature running through the trees. The next thing they knew, they were surrounded by shadowy figures with glowing red eyes. The creatures let out a terrible shriek that seemed to come from the very depths of hell. The group had stumbled upon a pack of demons. The ensuing chaos was too much for the group to comprehend. They were in a state of panic as the demons began to circle them, and soon enough they were surrounded by a sea of blood. The creatures were attacking each other in a frenzy of violence that the group had never seen before. The New Year's night had become a living nightmare, and the friends were left with no choice but to flee the forest. As they finally made it out of the woods, they could still hear the screams of the demons echoing in their minds. They would never forget this horrific New Year's night in their lives.